My name is Sakura Takano, and I'm the CEO of Rotary Charities. We've got our full staff on board today, and they will be introducing themselves along the way. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to kicking off this grant training. And today we are going to cover our grant categories. We have resources available online, but also think that people learn in different ways, and sometimes watching a video and kind of having this engagement is important too. We'll do a brief introduction to Rotary Charities if you don't already know us, and get to know each other a little bit before we dive into the grant categories kind of at a broader level. And then everyone will be able to kind of break out to talk more specifically about the Assets for Thriving grant category, as well as Systems Change Accelerator. There will be times where maybe you're early on in a project, or you might be unclear about which grant category fits best. And so please feel free to ask that in the chat or in the Q&A section, and we'll hopefully be able to guide you to the right spot for the breakout. Now, some of you know that I'm the new CEO, and I've been on the job for actually less than a year, and was on staff leading up our Assets for Thriving Communities and Impact Investing programs. But in the middle of all that, we did a refresh with our board of directors and staff and stakeholders to take a closer look at our mission and vision as we kind of went through a transformation back in 2018, and reflecting back on that time and really trying to look forward, kind of given all the things that have happened across our nation and in our community over the past year and a half or two. Really wanted to hone in and redefine our vision to look forward. And one of the things that we felt that kept resonating to us over and over again is just how impressed we were with how communities, individuals, and organizations have been so adaptive through this great time of change, and felt like that was a theme and a value that we wanted to help support organizations carry forward in their work. And so we have simplified our vision to help communities and really provide the resources that we have access to for communities to be adaptive and thriving, and most importantly, for everyone. During our discussions and planning process, we really couldn't highlight that last phrase more. If we could bold it and italicize it, really that's our hope and our vision for using our resources with community. We've also been able to hone in on how we articulate the different grant making and programmatic areas that we focus on to be really connected to funding, learning, and connecting people as well. That last one, I think, again, we've just seen the importance of human connection, community connection, and you'll see from us moving forward offerings in all three of those categories for the time to come. So today we're going to be focusing on our grant making strategy, but we did want to make sure, and if you do receive our newsletter, you will see lots of curated offerings when it comes to learning, whether it's virtually or hopefully in the near future in person, topics that, as we ask change makers in the region, that are important to them and can help them advance their work around leadership, governance, and board relationship building, systems change making, a lot of topics that might not necessarily be easy to access. And so we're doing a few different things, whether it's virtual professional development or providing that curated list of learning opportunities for people to easily get to them. We also offer a few different services related to connecting people to those leadership coaching hours through adaptive leadership cohort learning, which I see a few folks on this call today who are participating. We hope that is a fulfilling experience. We've heard for over 10 years how important that has been to many leaders in our community. So please check that out. We also have a very easy to access learning fund. If you are finding a professional development opportunity or some kind of credentialing that is outside of our area, we provide tuition assistance of $500 per individual and $2,000 per organization. We've been seeing a lot of usage of this fund. Miriam's done a great job of making sure that if people are interested in learning opportunities, that they know that they can access that learning fund very quickly. We try to do a 1-week turnaround when it comes to letting folks know if the training is eligible for that program. And also, this is kind of an adaptation from our initial crisis support team, which was helping organizations connect to professional consultants with sector specific or kind of issue specific knowledge to help consult through these tough times. We have broadened out what those eligible topics are, and that is available through a recovery support team. There's a really simple intake on our website where you can just say, hey, I'm looking for support because we've got to refresh our capital campaign, or we're having some internal technical and data storage questions, and we're trying to link up with a professional on the IT and kind of data management side. Our goal is to connect you with those resources. And the best part about it is it's free. So we cover the cost of the consultant hour. That is a confidential time for you and your consultants. And they do a kind of a summary of the experience, but really trying to get those resources quickly out to everybody during this time. We're going to jump right into talking about our funding pillars. And on the screen, you'll see the 4 different grant categories that we have on a regular cycle: Assets for Thriving Communities, Systems Change Accelerator, which we will focus on today. We also have 2 other grant categories called Changemaker Fellowships, which are based on individuals and bringing learning to the region, and Seed Grants, which we review on a monthly basis. We'll go into the categories a little bit more further down in the slides. And for the 2 categories that we're talking today, the primary thing is that if you think you have an initiative or project that might be a good fit for assets or systems change grants, we need to schedule a pre-grant meeting. If you haven't already scheduled one, Kristen Heddick is leading up our community assets grant category, and Freya Bradford is leading systems change grant meetings. So please contact either one of them if you haven't already done so to schedule a pre-grant meeting in the next few weeks. And we're going to jump right into talking about Assets for Thriving Communities. I'm going to introduce Kristen real quick. She is just coming off mute, who is the Director of Community Development and joined the Rotary Charities team in October. We were able to recruit her from Chicago. She's been in Michigan as a grad student up in the UP, and are very excited to have her on our team. She brings a wealth of nonprofit and also philanthropic experience to the region. So welcome, Kristen, and why don't you kick it off for us?
Thank you, Sakura, and good morning, everyone. I am looking forward to a time when I can meet you all in person. And so grants in this category, Assets for Thriving Communities, are generally support programs and projects that develop, strengthen, or adapt community assets or make an existing asset more available. Generally, prior to applying, applicants have already done a significant amount of groundwork to engage the community, to establish working relationships with stakeholders, and to execute research that will inform the project's or initiative strategy or kind of decision-making process. And just as a reminder, because we believe that resident voice is essential in determining what is best for our communities, we do look for and prioritize funding assets that have been identified by residents to be important to the community and to improve their quality of life. So therefore, we do recommend that applicants demonstrate a strong community engagement strategy and decision-making process in their application, though this category itself is not generally intended to fund that engagement process. You can think of these grants as supporting bricks and mortar projects or programs with potential grant uses, including accessible recreation, such as trail improvements, arts and culture programs, affordable housing, health and well-being initiatives, land preservation, education programs and initiatives. And grants are up to $50,000, and that can be stretched out over 1 to 3 years. Unless the board puts conditions on the grant, the funds are all dispersed up front. And we do have a matching requirement of at least 50% of the project's total cost. So for example, if your project cost is $100,000, you can request up to that $50,000 amount. But if your project total cost is, say, $80,000, you can request up to $40,000, with that remaining $40,000 of your project cost being the match requirement. And that match can be a combination of both cash and in kind. And in terms of deadlines, our spring deadline is March 1st, so that's coming up soon. And those decisions will be made in June. And the deadline for our fall applications, if you're not quite ready for spring, is September 1st, with decisions being made in December. And I would like to talk about just a few examples of some recent grants. Railroad Square in Kalkaska is actually a good example of an organization that used a seed grant to build the foundation of a larger project that was then awarded an Assets for Thriving Communities grant. Kalkaska's Downtown Development Authority has been leading an effort to honor their town's history and revitalize the downtown area. So after working with consultants to assess community needs, identify opportunities, they established a site development plan. And with that really well-informed plan in place, the DDA applied for and was awarded an Assets for Thriving Communities grant in 2017. And now if you go there, Railroad Square hosts farmers market. It's home to an event space and commercial kitchen, has a new clock tower, improved parking, and an improved stormwater drainage system. And Cognition Science and Discovery Center in Beulah offers interactive exhibits and learning opportunities designed for all ages. Last year, they received a grant to support their growth and expansion. That would include the creation of outdoor mobile science and art exhibit areas and programs to utilize the grounds surrounding the center, as well as additional indoor exhibits to highlight new interest areas. And lastly, the Rock of Kingsley began as an after-school center and evolved into a youth and senior community hub, event space, resource center for students, adults, and families alike. And last year, they received an Assets for Thriving Communities grant to support the preservation and expansion of their building to meet the growth in programming needs. And as with Kalkaska, the Rock received a seed grant in 2020 to support a feasibility study to determine the capacity of the community to support that capital campaign. So with that, as we mentioned, we will be taking questions later on. And so now I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Freya Bradford, who will talk about the Systems Change Accelerator grants.
Great. Thanks so much, Kristen. I am Freya Bradford. I oversee this category of grants called Systems Change Accelerators. This is a fairly new grant category for Rotary Charities. It started in 2018, and it's probably a little different than the typical grants that you're used to, that are more capital grants or program grants. These grants are intended to support collaborative initiatives. So they involve multiple players, usually across sectors, so not just nonprofit organizations, that have decided to come together to try to target kind of the upstream or root causes of some of these complex community problems that we have. The problems that you can see across almost any community that just don't seem to go away no matter what we invest in them. So problems like homelessness, lack of affordable housing, lack of childcare is becoming a really important issue in a lot of communities. Food insecurity, kind of sometimes these are called like the wicked problems. And we'll talk a little bit more about what a complex problem is and how this work is different. But I'll just give kind of some of the details about this grant category first. So this grant can fund up to $150,000 for 2 or 3 years, same amount of money, but it could be spread across 2 or 3 years. Usually that money goes to multiple partners within the initiative. Sometimes it does stay with one initiative, and we can talk more about that kind of stuff in the breakout if you come to my breakout later. There's a small match request for these. It's only 10%. It can include cash or in kind. And the reason we kept it really small is because, as you'll hear as I kind of walk through this, there's a lot of work that initiatives have been doing in order to get to the place where we're ready to fund a systems change kind of accelerator grant. So we know that lots has been invested on the front end, so we don't require a large match for the grant requirement here. Deadlines, again, we do these twice a year. So the next one's coming up March 1st, and there'll be another in the fall and September, decisions in June and December. So let me just tell you a little bit more, and I won't take too much time here, but what do we mean when we really talk about complex community problems? There are a growing number of folks that really think that kind of the meta problem here, the reason why these community problems aren't being solved, is that we treat them like simple problems or complicated problems. So we try to find a quick fix. We know what the solution is. If we could only have more money and scale some program or something, that this would go away. And that, their thinking is that these are complex problems. They're different. They should be treated differently. So you can kind of spot a complex problem by, really, is it something that just doesn't go away no matter what you try to do? Does, another problem pop up if you solve one? Is it difficult to see what the cause and effect relationship is? Sometimes you can only see that in retrospect with complex problems. And a lot of times folks don't even agree on what the real problem is or what the solution is. There's lots of different perspectives on that. And, systems are constantly evolving because everything's kind of interconnected and all messy and tangled. So you change one thing and another thing changes. So these complex problems are constantly adapting and evolving, and they're hard to kind of get your finger on. And, you can't rely on like past experience in complex problems. So if you tried something 5 years ago and it worked, it may not work again in the future because of that dynamic nature. So then what do we do when problems are complex, especially at the community level? So that's where kind of systems change or systems practice thinking comes in. It says that we need to convene and connect all of those different players that are kind of across the system and seeing the problem from different angles. We need to surround the problem with all of this, including those that are experiencing the problem. We need to look at the problem differently through a different lens and don't assume we really know what the solution is. Because if we knew, we would probably have solved it by now. We need to kind of look for these leverage points or places in the system where if we do a little bit, it might have ripple effects throughout the system. Oops, we need to go forward here. And then once we see those leverage points, we need to kind of try what we call like a constellation of actions to change those root causes. So we need to connect the actions of multiple players in a way that makes sense for the system so that these patterns will change over time. And most importantly, we need to learn together across the system as we go. So we need to try new things and experiment and feed that learning back into this community that's surrounding the problem so that everyone can learn and these actions can get wiser and wiser as we go forward. So that is a really quick primer on systems practice in a nutshell. It's of course much deeper than that. So we could talk a little bit more about that in the breakout, or you can attend some of our learning sessions that are coming up too, where we dig into this. But let's just real quick. So what are we changing when we're changing systems? We're changing these things in this triangle here. So we're changing policies and practices and the way resources flow, the way that relationships are connected across the system, who has power in the system. And we're trying to change, what we think about the problem, what these mental models are that are influencing the ways that we act. So those are the things that folks are working on, maybe with their strategies that we're helping to fund. And I'll just go through a couple, well, I'll just go through one example for the sake of time now, and we could talk more about Housing North and the breakout. One recent grantee in this category started with a seed grant, again, like Kristen mentioned, in the assets category. It's an organic waste diversion group. They're trying to get food waste out of our landfills, because in the landfill, food waste creates lots of greenhouse gas, and it can be used actually and turned into compost that can be used for farming and returned back as an asset to our systems. So there sounds like a simple problem in some ways. You think, okay, we'll just pick up the organic waste and we'll compost it and get it to farmers. But as you look kind of back at these, you can see under the surface, there's lots of different policies that are involved in that. You know, state policy that regulates if local government has to address organic waste or not. There's practices of haulers and practices of restaurants and individuals. And there are, you know, mental models that are kind of holding us back. Like some folks may think composting is great, but don't do it near me, or don't make me do anything differently. Or, you know, there's just lots of different factors, like any complex problem, that need to be looked at. So this group is coming together with state government, local government, local nonprofits, and they're, you know, some folks from the restaurant and brewing industry, and they're really trying to figure out what can we do to address this organic waste problem in our region. So it's really exciting work, and we're happy to be funding it. So let me just real quick. So we heard about assets, and now we've heard about systems. And this slide is just a real quick look at what's the difference. So if you have a discrete kind of program, or a building that you need to, you know, to build or renovate, or, you know, maybe a piece of land you want for development, or a trail, those are things that are community assets. So those can be funded under assets. If you have a really complex problem and you want to work with lots of other folks to really try to understand and get to the roots, those are through systems grants and related seed grants that can help you get started. So hopefully that will help you get a better idea of where you might want to go for the breakouts. I am going to pass it back to Sakura to talk a little bit more about those seed grants and Changemaker fellowships.
Thank you, Freya, and thank you, Kristen, for the high-level overview of the grant categories. So I mentioned earlier our seed grant, which, you know, many of you may have looked at before, but it was designed originally to help, as you can see by the, you know, here by the title, seed an idea, seed an initiative, and, you know, provide some support for those early actions that are necessary to think through and really understand, you know, the process and even sometimes the programs and goals of a given initiative. So we look at these on a monthly basis. The application is on our website, and typically we see grant requests for up to $10,000 with a match of 25% of the total project costs. These are reviewed on a monthly basis, and you would find out if you were awarded the following month of your application. You know, they're meant to be nimble. They last a year. We don't really see many that, or if any, that have gone beyond that. But really the idea is to help at the beginning phase of projects. And sometimes those grants lead to applications for a community asset or a systems change initiative. We also have a Changemaker Fellowship, which is really different because it is generally connected to an individual who is learning about something or learning about a topic that could really leverage and benefit more folks or organizations in our region. And so we've seen people who, Josh Stoltz from Grow Benzie participated in an international cohort and brought some of that learning around systems change back to the region. We are also looking at other applications that are focusing on some of those tough kind of elements around systems change and how to help more of the folks that are working in that way in our region deepen their practice. So we'll have something in the spring that will focus on that. And again, this is an individual application for up to $20,000. to help with deep learning and bringing those learnings to our area. So we're going to transition to talk a little bit more about the grant criteria for folks who are used to applying for either, government grants or foundation grants. This is a little unique to us in that we've articulated our expectations and what we're trying to learn from grant applications in a little bit of a different way. So Freya is going to talk us through those criteria right now.
All right. So I used to be a full-time grant writer, mostly for federal grants. So this is where you really want to pay attention. This is how we score all of our grant applications, but it's really, these criteria there's 6 of them. These are the first 3 are much more important to us than that. They really are forming kind of our theory of change. So back when we made our shift in 2018 to kind of try to get more durable and equitable kind of projects and initiatives going, we asked a bunch of you, what does it take? How do we need to work differently in order to make lasting change so that we're not continuously treating the symptoms over and over again? And, we talked with you, we talked with folks in, the field of philanthropy and broadly, and we really intentionally put together these 6 criteria that have served us pretty well to score grants. We also apply them to ourselves. We try to embody these criteria as well. So they take on a little different kind of flavor depending on the grant type. And this information is in your grant guidance document. We can also talk more about it in the breakouts, but I'm just going to give you the quick overview of each of these. So the inclusive criteria is really about how well you're listening to the community, those you serve, those that will benefit from what you're doing. How have you heard their voices and used what they said in your planning for whatever it is that you're doing, be it a building or trying to solve this complex problem. Collaborative is a criteria about connecting with others to do your work as often as you can. Not every grant has to be a collaborative grant for Rotary Charities. So I just want to dispel that kind of idea. You can come in for a capital grant that's just for you, and that's okay. What we'll look at though is how you have a history of collaborating for other things in the region. So do you work with others, in what way, on what? So the history of collaboration is what we look for oftentimes in those assets grants. If you are coming in for a collaborative assets grant, that's great. Systems grants have to be pretty collaborative, so it is a requirement there. So our resourceful criteria is really about how well you are using the resources that already exist in our communities, be it like money or knowledge, or skills, things like that. So how are you tapping what already exists in order to kind of make the most of what we have here? Because we have a lot. Sometimes it's just a matter of unlocking it and weaving it in different ways. It's also about that resourceful criteria is where we think about leverage. So what other money are you bringing to the table from other funders, from yourself? And so the rest of the criteria are here. Number 4 is really about learning how well can you kind of forecast what you'll be looking for as far as success metrics go. How have you learned in the past? How do you evaluate your work? And then adaptive is really about how do you apply what you learn? So are you learning but not applying, which is common. And we struggle with that too. Adaptive is about how you're taking that information and weaving it back into what you do so that you can continue to get better and better at what you're putting out in the community. It's also about, how are your buildings adaptive? So a different kind of way of talking about adaptive. How can you adapt to the needs of everyone in the community? How can you adapt to future needs and build things that can adapt into the future as needs change? So the final one is about alignment, and this is similar to collaboration, but alignment is more loosely held, I'd say. It's about like, how well do you see yourself as a part of a community that's working towards something? So how are you aligning with others in the community when you're doing the work that you're doing? You may not even be collaborating with them, but you're aware of them and you situate what you do in relation to what other people do so that we're not duplicating or overlapping, and we're making the most of kind of what everyone's doing. So those are the criteria. We will have time to go into those detail and even more detail in the breakouts. And I'm passing it to Kendra at this point to talk about SurveyMonkey Apply. So really kind of some technical details about how do you apply.
Thank you, Freya. My name's Kendra Luda, and I am the Programs Associate at Rotary Charities. So I'll be kind of walking through a little bit of the logistics side of this. I have quite a few slides, but they're all very simple. I just wanted to kind of show you, for those of you who have not used SurveyMonkey Apply, what it looks like. For those of you who have accounts and have applied before, some of this will be reviewed, but hopefully you'll be able to get something out of it as well. So there's kind of two ways to log into SurveyMonkey Apply. You can use this link, which we will be sending out a PDF of these slides. So you'll be able to click that link. And then at the bottom of each grant page on our website, at the very bottom, it says apply online. That will get you to that link as well. Next slide. We'll be going through that kind of quickly for you, sorry. So when you click apply online, it will come to this page. This has our grant, our grant options. And then up in the upper right, if you already have an account, you log in. And if you don't, you just simply click the register button. And then the next page will be just a common, register page, fill in your contact information. Keep in mind that the person that fills out this information will become your account's primary administrator. They have a little bit different, they kind of have different access in the account, and I'll cover that in a couple of slides, but just keep that in mind as you're deciding who signs up for this account. So you'll create their account. It will give you a prompt to verify it. The next page will be filling in your organization. And then also at the bottom, just note that we at Rotary Charities on the back end can't recover your password or username or really assist you with many account logistics. You have to go directly to SurveyMonkey Apply, which they're very, very nice there. They're very helpful, but it might take a couple of days. So just try to keep track of those things, just because that will help you kind of get through the process more smoothly. So once you get to this login page here, you'll see all the grant options. You simply click more to start the application process. Once you start that process, it's pretty straightforward. You just kind of do step by step. This is also where you will have any attachment you have, any budgets, any extra paperwork that we ask for, that will all happen in here. And then once you start the application as well, you can come back to it anytime to edit it before it's submitted. Next slide, thanks. And then once you get there, once you kind of have your application going and you saved it, you want to do some edits and you're like, where is it? How do I find it? It's pretty straightforward as well too. It comes up on your home account page. There's also a little link in the upper right there that says my applications. All the applications you have will show up right here. There's also a filter if you have multiple applications and you only want ones that are open or ones that are already submitted. You can kind of filter that on this page as well. And then this is where, I don't know how many people use this, but this is kind of a cool feature. It's teams, and this is where you can kind of select teams for your grant. So might be useful for organizations who apply for grants of different program areas. So if you have a couple of different departments that apply for different grants, you can create a team for each grant, depending on who's working on it. Or also for those, maybe those systems change grants where you might have multiple contributors to the same grant. And then also you can add members to your organization. And this kind of goes step by step, and I won't go through that, but this is where those roles come into play. The primary administrator pretty much has full access to your account. They can create teams, invite members, assign members as an administrator. They kind of can do everything. Administrators can create or submit applications, but they can't create teams or invite team members. And then non-administrators, they can edit applications, but cannot create or submit. So as you're going through this, just something to kind of keep in mind if you decide to go this route and add members and teams, just to be mindful of that as you move forward with it. And I believe that was it. And so it's a pretty simple process, but if anyone gets stuck along the way, has any questions, please reach out to myself. There's my email. I'm more than happy to help. We want to see you succeed in this process as much as you do.
Our main purpose for the pre-grant meeting is to make sure that the concept, project, or initiative is aligned with our grant making criteria and process, so that folks are, not spending unnecessary time if it's not eventually a good fit, and really just hoping to make our process as efficient and transparent as possible. So Kristen, I'm going to advance our slide for you.
Great, thank you. And I was just, looking at the chat and seeing some great aspirations in terms of, broadening programs and bringing, live music programming to broader communities. So it's great to see, everybody's, optimism of moving forward, as we move forward and into spring and summer and past COVID. So we did talk a little bit and give you a brief overview about our eligibility and requirements and criteria. And we will take questions at the end of this, but here's just a few other things to think about before applying, keeping in mind, again, that these assets grants are meant for projects and initiatives that have already done a significant amount of groundwork. And as you can see, those first few in terms of, have evidence your project is needed, that your asset will be widely available to the public, you've consulted with project beneficiaries. Again, those speak to that community engagement and outreach piece that we talked about earlier. And again, just reiterating that 50% project cost match. If you are coming in with multiple partners, do you have a written MOU or partnership agreement that really outlines people's roles and responsibilities? And then again, that pre-grant meeting with either Sakura or myself, if you can check those off, then you are likely ready for this asset grant category. And then we can talk about the scoring process, which we do score applications on a 5-point scale, and that's for each of the grant criteria that Freya went over earlier. And applications are reviewed by a group of staff, Rotary Charity board members, and Rotarian volunteers. And then in terms of other documents that we ask you for, we do ask for various financial documents, including a project budget, for which you can use our template, which will be in SurveyMonkey Apply as you complete your application, or you can attach your own budget to the application. So we do ask for a number of other documents and attachments in addition to the project budget. You'll need a list of board members, an organizational operating budget, so a budget of your entire organization, balance sheet for the current and previous fiscal year, a budget narrative, just kind of talking a little bit about, what those uses are, in terms of the project cost and how you foresee that. Your most recent audit, if your organizational operating budget is at that requirement level, and if you're below that threshold of $750,000, you can submit independently reviewed financials. And if you are a really tiny budgeted organization, which does happen, and you don't have an audit or independent review, we will accept your most recent tax return. And then in addition, the board minutes from the meeting authorizing the grant application. And again, if applicable, because you are, working with partners, that MOU, and then also a statement of work. And we do also ask for 3 references whom we reach out to with a few questions of our own, and who can speak to the project and or initiative that you're applying for. And with that, we will open it up to questions.
I have a question, and I'm from the Solon Township Parks Committee. I was curious if we are in the process of applying for a DNR grant for our parks program. would you still consider some funding through the assets breakout, even though that we don't have a commitment at this point?
That's a great question, Mary, and it's good to see you. So in the budget, there are columns that you can indicate if it's a committed fund or if it's a pending grant request. So there is a way to differentiate between secured or things that you still have in the works, depending on how far along in the total fundraising you are, and how big of a component the Rotary Charities grant request is. There are different ways that we manage that. Sometimes it can look like the form of a contingent grant award. So you may be, successful with a grant application, and in the grant agreement letter, it will say something to the effect of contingent upon, proof of, X grant or, other funders who have committed to the project. And once that contingency is met, then we're able to sign off on the grant agreement and issue a check.
Thank you so much. That answers quite a bit.
Great. Good question, Mary. That one comes up a lot. Betsy.
Hi. Excuse me. I'm interested in knowing about the audit for organizations with $750,000 budget or larger. Is that an actual full audit, or is it the usual review done by the CPA?
It would be the latter. So we're not asking for new documents to be created, but most often, larger nonprofits are already doing their own financial review. And so it would just be to submit the most recent version of what's already there.
Thank you. That's wonderfully helpful.
Great. Angie?
Hi, thank you. We're going to apply for the assets grant, basically moving on from a seeds grant we got last year. And so my question is, how many grant awards can we have at any one time? Because if I apply for this, there's a few other things that I might be looking at later this fiscal year that might fall into that seeds category. So is it possible to have more than one active grant with you at a time?
Another great question. You guys are hitting the ballpark, hitting out of the ballpark. So you cannot have more than one grant in the same category at the same time. You can have an open seed grant and apply for an Assets for Thriving Communities or Systems Change grant. Now, we prefer for the seed grant to be closed out or in the process or kind of, at the tail end of the grant cycle for another application, but they are not mutually exclusive. And, one example of that is, let's say there's a seed grant that's halfway through and things are, working out where your intended activities are all chugging along and you feel like you're, in a good space to take it to the next level and apply for the Assets or Systems Change grant. Then we would have a discussion at the pre-grant meeting on the progress of the seed grant, anticipated closure of that grant, and then that kind of gives a green light for applying for an assets grant. But with that, as we mentioned earlier, we are available for any questions that you might have. Sometimes those questions can just be easily covered in a pre-grant meeting. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope you learned more about our organization and the different ways that we provide funding resources to the community, whether it's through grant making, our learning programs, or just convening folks to build those connections with each other.
I'm going to make you type in a few words or less, what complex problem are you working on? Maybe you're not working on a complex problem. Maybe you're just curious about this grant category. That's okay too. But if you do have a specific problem that you're working on, let us know. Sue, ending child sexual abuse. Margie, teen and young adult parents. College access. Chuck, forever chemicals. Yes. PFAS. Esther, mostly curious. Childcare, great. Esther, there's a great group, if you're not plugged in with them, that has been working on childcare as a systemic problem. So let me know if you'd like to be connected to them if you're not. Great. Incubator Farm. Great. Well, welcome all. I'm glad to see I'm not alone. I never know if anyone's going to show up for this crazy category each time we offer it. But lo and behold, we've funded someone most of these grant cycles. So we have about 9 different initiatives right now that are using kind of this systems approach for complex problems. So it's pretty exciting. And we all gather together quarterly in a community of practice that if you're funded in this category, you will join, where Sue can tell you all about it. She's there, where we talk about this crazy systems change work kind of at a higher level and connect with each other and support each other in kind of the challenges, because it's different. It's really hard and it's frustrating sometimes, but also pretty hopeful and exciting too at other times, because it feels like this might be different enough to actually make some of the change possible. So, I'm kind of feeling like I want to hear from all of you. So instead of like going through more slides, which we can do, I'm curious about what your questions are. So yeah, this is a paradigm shift, right? I mean, I don't think most of us really are taught this way of working, or, even in school, we're not really taught to be systems thinkers. And so it is a different way of working. If it doesn't feel different, it would surprise me. So, and with different comes all this confusion and like fuzziness and discomfort, because we're not used to really working when we can't see the path forward always. We're not used to having to collaborate and count on people from outside our own organization. So it can be quite different. So what questions, feel free to unmute. Let's just make this a conversation if we can. If you don't have questions at the tip of your tongue, I'll just go through and bore you with more slides. But what are you curious about?
I'm curious, Freya. So I was debating, which of these sessions I should go to, because the project at hand for us is it's a mobile testing lab. It's an actual semi-trailer with lab equipment in it that goes around the region, and we test groundwater. So on one hand, it's an asset for a thriving community. It's a public health issue. There's an actual trailer that goes around and does actual work, all around the state, all around the country. On the other side, in order to make that happen, it's more than just one organization. The whole idea of collaboration is baked into the business model between private capital, including foundations and et cetera, industry, and academic researchers. So it's the whole model itself is collaborative, and not one can do it without the other two. So that's kind of a system. It's not an existing system, it's a new system. So I'm not going to change it, I'm going to build it. But it's for an actual asset, like a mobile MRI unit, but with other sophisticated equipment in the back.
Yeah.
So I was debating which of these breakout sessions to attend, or am I misreading? Should it be clearer to me who I should be talking to about what?
No, it's not. The lines are fuzzy sometimes, for sure, and we're building this as we go at the same time too. So the way you've described it and the way I understand it, Chuck, it sounds like a really good assets grant that would meet those criteria that we talked about really well. So I think that would be where I would direct you. And it's not because what you're doing won't cause systems to change, and it's not because you're not doing systems change stuff, but it's because of the discrete nature of what you're talking about. So if you need money for something you can touch and feel, usually that will work better in the assets category, which is also it's it's easier in some ways to kind of describe what you're doing and get people to understand and want to invest in it. So
Terrific.
if
Thank
you
you.
can fit in that category, I think great. If
Can I
you're doing,
stay here for now and just listen?
sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Great. Other questions or curiosities or reactions?
Hi, Freya. I have a question. As
Ginger.
you know, TCAPS has recently received a Systems Accelerator grant. And knowing that we have a secondary need that I believe would fall under this category. And I'm wondering if Rotary would accept an application if we are currently already receiving funds from another grant. Like, do you look at two going at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great question that we didn't address in the big session. So thank you. So you couldn't apply for two of the same types of large grants at the same time. So you couldn't do two systems change grants at the same time. However, we have in several cases now, which is pretty cool. And Chuck, this might be interesting to you too. Like, we have noticed, systems change initiatives get started, and out of them grows really interesting ideas for concrete assets and things that are needed that could be funded with assets grants. So an example would be like the homeless youth initiative. We funded with a systems change grant. So we were funding a lot of the convening and like exploring the problem, just bringing folks together, sharing data, trying to figure out data sharing across lines. Anyway, long story short, like the whole East Bay Flats kind of became an idea during that systems change project. And we invested in East Bay Flats through an impact investment, which is another type of vehicle that we didn't even mention today, but they're low interest loans that are available to folks. So all that to say, yeah, if there's something that fits in the assets category, go ahead and apply. The other thing that we can do is seed grants during any of these large grants as well. We've done that too. So seed grants can come before a large grant. They can also come during to kind of bring you to the next level. So we try to be as flexible as possible. The only thing that's a really hard no are two of the same large grant categories at the same time.
Okay, maybe I just need to clarify a little bit. So this is a different topic. So previously we were looking at wellness, whereas the challenge we are looking at now is college access across our region. So would that still be considered the same? Is that the same answer, I should say?
Yeah, it would be if TCAPS would be the fiscal agent, but with these systems change grants, one of the nice things is, since they're supposed to be very collaborative, that you could use a different fiscal agent within your collaboration. TCAPS could still be involved as a partner. You could still even receive money from that, but another fiscal agent has to kind of say, yep, I'm going to take ownership of this grant and I'm going to disperse the funds to partners.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great question.
For the Incubator Farm project, we are looking at several, like the USDA Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Grant, and a few other private ones. And I think this, not sure about locally exactly, but I'm wondering about what types of categories this might help fund. We have a lease on a property, but it needs a lot of capital improvements to make it a working farm again. And then we're also hoping to hire a farm manager and looking for salary and then other like programming costs and things. So I'm wondering if there's limitations on what the funds can be used for.
Yeah, and again, Samantha, I feel like that just in that little snippet that you provided sounds to me more like an assets grant. We can fund salaries easily under assets. We can fund, and because it's salaries for a program, often I think like if you have a program in mind or a service in mind that's going to directly work with beneficiaries, that is not systems change. Systems change is more about trying, in the way we define it, and I shouldn't say it's not systems change, but in the way we define it, systems change is more about changing policy and kind of upstream stuff that would that's not directly with the people you're trying to reach usually. So in this case, and especially since it's capital and building, like if you can touch it, it's probably not this category in most cases. So I'd say assets is probably a better bet for you for that type of work.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess my supervisor had suggested systems because ultimately the goal is to help change the food system locally towards regional food. But right now we probably need to start with assets. So that's quite a lot like TCAPs, I guess, right now. Or Chucks, actually, no Chucks.
Chucks, yeah, absolutely. And that, yeah, not to say that what you're doing won't change the system long term. There's lots of programmatic things that we can do to improve systems, but this particular grant is more for rewiring or re-looking at how relationships are, or power, or our mindsets. It's like much fuzzier stuff, really. That's why I say it's really different. It's hard to get your head around what this type of grant is really for. So don't feel bad. It's taken us a couple of years to be able to even articulate what it's all about. So Margie, yeah.
So Generations Ahead, as you know, but for those others who don't, is a program or organization that supports teen parents and those who are pregnant. And we have been working almost exclusively in Grand Traverse County unless a client of ours moves across into a different county. But one of our goals in the next year or so is to expand our services. And for us, the work we do is, supporting our teen parents, but we also work collaboratively with many different partners that these teen parents bump into across different sectors. So education partners, childcare partners, mental health issues, substance use. I mean, the list goes on, as you can imagine, housing partners. I could keep going. So as we think about expansion into other areas, specifically other counties, it will really take a lot of effort staff-wise on developing those connections. So the funding we would want, basically sitting with Generations Ahead, but the work will be developing systems and getting them in place so that when we expand, we can do the work that we do, which is collaboration with all these other organizations. Do you see this more as systems, assets, or neither?
You guys are testing me today. Okay, so these are, I know are really, you're doing great at summarizing what you're up to, but I also feel in some cases I need a little bit more detail. I'm like, okay. Let me see, Margie, I know a little bit about what you're doing. I think if there were a systems grant around providing better support to teen parents, it would involve what you're talking about. It would involve surrounding the problem, like going out and saying, hey, all of you other folks that care about providing support to teen parents, do you want to get together regularly? That's kind of the first question. Like if it's just Generations Ahead trying to make better partnerships, I still feel like that could be a seed grant, that could be an assets grant, that's still good work. But for this, it's like everyone shares the same intention. So all those people would agree to get around a table, virtual table, Zoom, whatever, to talk about the problem of supporting teen parents. And then you would explore together, well, what does the problem look like now? Where are the gaps? How can we, make more change in this area? So then through that exploration, which is usually done through a seed grant, so convening and then exploring the problem, usually a seed grant, and you'll find like, oh, well, if we just did this a little bit differently, maybe this would happen. So you get ideas for change. And then this grant would pay for those new kind of the work of changing the system. So maybe if there's a policy that needs to change at the high school, or maybe there's a policy that needs to change at state government or local government, and you need to do advocacy or awareness building, or maybe you need to connect partners in a more concrete way, like you need to develop some sort of like base camp where everybody can see what everyone's doing. I'm like trying to think of all the different things that folks in this category have used the money for. Maybe you need to do some narrative change work. So if Sue were here, she would talk about what they're doing with child sexual assault. They're trying to understand how the community feels about their role in protecting children. So in your case, how does the community think about teen parents and their role in supporting them? And I'm trying to intentionally like think about your problem specifically as not preventing, although what you do I know does prevent in some cases future pregnancies too, but more of that problem of support. So anyway, so then those types of things by multiple partners, if those were what you were using the funding for, then I'd say that could be a systems change grant. So I hope that helps and gives others a little bit more of an example of like how this could look. I know it's still probably a little fuzzy, but so you know, generations ahead, yeah, if you're being super collaborative, you're going to score really well on assets grants or seed grants. So it's like these criteria apply no matter what grant you're going for, but it just takes a little different kind of flavor in each category. So did that help, Margie? Or tell me if it didn't, and we need to get better and better at explaining what we're talking about. So challenge me.
It helps. I think it becomes a bigger question within our organization of what is our role. So, you know, is our role to support the parents? Is our role to change systems? And I'd say yes and yes, but it's not traditionally what we have done. So it becomes a bigger question for us.
Absolutely. I think that's really wise of you to think, is this our role? Because most nonprofits aren't set up to do this work, right? You're set up to respond to the needs of those you serve or the environment. You know, Christine, in your case, you know, you're there to respond to the needs of the present time, not to necessarily think about. And that's the challenge of this grant too, is really thinking about like, well, could we, should we, could we, you know, like, is this even us? And often the answer is no, like, no, we need to respond to the crises that are happening right now. And that needs to happen as long as we have systems that aren't working for everyone. We need organizations, you know, nonprofits to say, we're here to respond to that need now. Our challenge, I guess, is to say like, well, if we only work down there, we're just going to continuously have people coming into the problem and environments coming into the problem over and over again. So is there something we can do as the sector, nonprofit sector, government sector, to move some of the resources upstream and say, could we do work differently up here so that we have fewer and fewer people down here? So that's the spirit of the category. Christine, you unmuted.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So you're really talking a lot about like this supporting, I'm going to say a thing, like you've identified, I'm going to use like any collaborative effort we do, like Boardman Watershed, Mitchell Creek Watershed, things where we're convening a bunch of people together. For us, it's protecting water quality, but the actual piece of the systems change is like, we're actually going to be doing a thing that we've identified. Can this grant support like the fact that group is getting together and identifying things as they come up, or do those things need to be identified first? Like Mitchell Creek, we did a seed grant. We got everybody together and we have like a work plan for the next few years of things that we want to do. And we've identified this need to have a bigger collaborative effort. That's like the next, we had like environmental folks and we need like the next circle of people engaged in that. Do we have to have identified like the actual things that collaborative group wants to be doing? Or can it be the like convening of it for a while longer until those things are established and then potentially like that stuff kind of cycling through? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And it's a great question. And all of your questions have been great because you're making me go through what I would have presented anyway in a much more engaging way, I think, and much more useful for all of you. So yes, it can be used for the convening of folks, but you do need to identify at least a first few, I'd say, to make a constellation. So you still need that first constellation of actions, but we know, and this is something that we're learning even more and more as we have more experience in this category, is that you really need to hold some of that money for emergence, I guess, or things that will emerge as you learn. So which you remember the things I went through around that circle. It's like, you're going to do your first few actions and you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to return that back to the people working, and they're going to get ideas and inspiration about how to do it a little differently, or what to work on next, or maybe it is the right thing and you just need to continue to do that. So almost all of the initiatives do have some money for a convener to continue to bring folks together, because that is absolutely crucial in this. But they all identify at least a couple actions. And then a lot of times what folks are doing now, which I didn't think would fly with our board, but it has so far, which is really cool, is just in their budget, like setting aside like a, what are they calling it? I don't know, like funds for emergent action, like a whole section where we don't know what we're going to do, but if you show us that you have the process to identify what that stuff is, and you're going to bring folks together, you're going to learn, you're going to continuously try to adapt what you do. If those look really good, then it's the board's like, yeah, okay, I feel like they're going to be able to identify the next actions, and I feel comfortable with that. So it is a totally different way for funders to work, because usually they want to know exactly what the money is going to be spent on, down to the dollar that you're going to spend on cups. So this is different.
Well,
and it's stretching.
From a recipient perspective, it's incredibly valuable, as these grants can extend from 1 to 3 years. And if we don't have that flexibility to change and adapt and grow, then we're like stuck into what we thought 3 years ago was going to be useful. So just as a kudos to the fact that you guys are allowing us to learn through the process, and then supporting what that learning has discovered, is incredibly valuable as a grant recipient. So
great. Yes, absolutely. I hope it can continue. I think it can, because I mean, otherwise it just goes against the whole spirit of adaptation and learning, and all the things we know are super important in systems change. So it's good. I'm glad that it's working so far anyway. What else?
Freya, I have a question. Do you award more than one systems change? Okay.
Yeah, it depends on, we don't split evenly between assets and systems. We have one pot of money, and we judge them all in one big pot. So there have been cases where we've only funded one. There have been cases where we funded 4 in one cycle. So yeah, but never more than 4. But yeah, so far we have a couple of initiatives so far, if you're curious, that I know are going to come in under this category. So it's looking pretty competitive, but that's okay. It's good. And keep in mind too, if you're just getting started, you can always start with that seed grant too. And I should say the seed grants, I have some secret information, don't have to be $10,000 if you're really trying to kick off an intentional systems change project. We know it takes more money. We don't advertise it always, but you can ask for more than 10.
Another component of our project is exploring farm transition and retiring farmers and getting new folks onto their land. So if we were to designate it as part, like that section of things that we're exploring, then would we be able to look more at the systems component?
Wow. Yes. However, I will say we have a systems change grant focused on that through the Food and Farming Network. So you'd want to talk to Megan McDermott about, they're about to end though, I believe. So they will have, that's the other thing about these that is different from other funding, is that you can ask for continuation funding too, which, because we know this takes more, systems change takes more than 3 years. So we have already funded so at least one, the Homeless Youth Initiative a second time. So they could come in, you could be the fiscal, you could rearrange how it's fashioned, but the intention of that was one of our first ones. That whole systems change grant was around farmland succession. So you may have different ideas of how that should be addressed, but.
That's funny. I actually work with them and they've been doing a lot of restructuring the network altogether, but I've come in more recently. So, all right, I'll connect with them on that topic.
Sounds good. Great. So I was looking at my notes, and one thing I want to stress is that an MOU, or a memorandum of understanding, or some other partnership agreement with your partners is required for this category. So you need to talk about who the partners are, what their different roles are, who the fiscal agent is, how you will get funds to the other partners if you are sharing the funds in that MOU. So it usually takes some time to kind of negotiate those things. So I want to make sure everybody knows that up front. Let's see what else. I think we covered a lot. You will get these slides. Oh, maybe I'll mention the community of practice yet. So I did mention briefly that these grantees meet quarterly in a community of practice. There is a position that you're required to name in your grant called a learning steward, which is really, it's different, but you can use the money from this grant to support that person's work. And what they do is, one, they come to the community of practice and they share about your initiative, about the signs of change that they're noticing in the system, so that others that are working on systems change can kind of hear that and get ideas about what is systems change and what does it look like. And they also hopefully are returning that kind of learning. They're the ones that are helping to that top thing that kind of popped up on that circle, helping your system to learn. So they're maybe collecting data. Maybe it's some traditional evaluation methods still work in systems change. Maybe they're collecting surveys or focus groups or something like that, where they're trying to help you determine if the system is changing. So in our pre-grant meeting, we can talk more about what that role is and all about if you are going to go forward with this grant. But I did want to mention that, and the community of practice is quarterly, and we can talk more about like, well, how much do we budget for that role? How much should it be? There's no hard and fast rule there necessarily, but there's a question to ask you to talk about that person.
Freya,
Yeah.
can I jump back 1 minute on what you said about the MOUs?
Yes.
Is the MOU need to be executed prior to the application being submitted?
It does, yeah, it needs to be attached. And
Okay.
actually, this is something that changed to, in our first round in 2018, we did not require it. And almost all of the initiatives spent probably months early on trying to negotiate these things and figure out who's doing what and how money would get out, and all important stuff. But we thought, well, why don't we help folks do that on the front end? So if you do need help, let me know. It's something probably that maybe our recovery team, some consultants that are in there could actually help you with that. If you do need help, kind of what is an MOU? How do I structure it? What makes sense? So.
Well, I've done MOUs in the past, but I'm wondering if there is a grant application on March 1st, which is less than a month away.
Yeah.
And depending on how many MOUs need to be executed between now and then, that may put a wrinkle in the scheduling for the application for some.
Yep. It could. So I would encourage you to think of it as one MOU with multiple signatures, so that can help. So not individual, like 10 letters with 10 partners, but you're all kind of literally on the same page with what's going on. But yeah, I apologize if this is the first you're hearing of it. It is, I hope it's in the grant guidance, but you may not have had a chance to look at that yet.
You're right. And I'm a neophyte at this, so this could very well be common knowledge to everyone in the room but me.
No, I don't think it is. I don't think every grantor requires it. So I apologize if it's going to set you back at all. Okay. The other thing I could mention is seed grants don't have to be a year long. So maybe you get a seed grant to help you with these early kind of partnership agreements. And we've done that before, where it takes 4 months or 6 months and you're getting our money to help negotiate these things. And then you apply in the spring, in the fall, September.
So are MOUs required for not only systems change grants, but also the assets for thriving community?
No, only if the money that you'll be getting through the assets grant is going to different partners. So if you are actually like re-granting anything, then you would need to have an MOU that describes that.
Thank you.
Yep. I will say too, Chuck, if the success of your project is highly dependent on those partnerships, it would be a good idea to have an MOU, even in the assets category. That's the other case that I can think of, even if money is not going to other partners. If your project absolutely can't succeed without your partners doing what they say they're going to do, then an MOU is the way to go there too.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Well,
That
great.
makes sense.
And I was just going to mention, we're coming up on time, but you will get these slides, and there are the slides that I was going to go through during this session. There's some detailed bullets, and I believe they're in the grant guidance document as well, about that really fleshes out each of those criteria and what we're looking for in more detail than what I went through in the initial kind of run through. So it applies then, what does collaboration mean for systems grants, and what does inclusion mean for system grants? And I will say that's exactly what we look at when we're scoring. So what you see as bullet points under each of those criteria in the grant guidance document and in these slides, that's exactly what reviewers see too. So if you have any questions about what any of that means, we can answer any of those between now and March 1st too. Well, awesome. Let me just make sure I'm not forgetting any crucial bits and pieces. I don't think so. I think we did a good job through your questions and answers. So thank you for being here and your interest in this crazy category. And I hope to have some pre-grants soon and talk through this a little bit more.